In South Korea, there's a massive, thriving underground economy that, legally speaking, isn't supposed to exist at all. Every single part of the sex trade is against the law. So how can something be so widespread, yet so completely forbidden?
That's the huge paradox we're going to unpack. It's a question that really gets to the heart of this long-running battle between the law, morality, and just, well, reality. And the story really kicks off with one single piece of legislation that changed absolutely everything.
So you have to go back to 2004. This was the year South Korea passed a law that would totally reshape an entire industry, basically pushing it from out in the open deep into the shadows.
They called it the Sex Trade Special Law, and its scope was, frankly, total. It didn't just go after the managers or the owners. It criminalized everyone. The buyer, the seller, the person arranging it, the whole shebang. But the law kind of had this split personality. It was designed to wipe out the industry entirely, but at the same time it aimed to protect the workers by officially defining them as victims.
And this law had teeth for sure. The penalties were serious for everybody caught up in it. We're talking up to a year in prison or a fine of around 3 million won, which is more than 2,000 US dollars. The government's message couldn't have been clearer. This stops now.
The most immediate, most visible effect of this new law was the disappearance of something that had been a fixture in Korean cities for literally decades.
To really get the impact, you have to look at the history. I mean, after the Korean War, the government itself was involved in managing sex work in so-called camp towns near U.S. military bases. They even did health checks. By the 80s and 90s, this grew into these huge, famous red light districts like Miari. But that 2004 law, it was a bombshell. Massive crackdowns basically shattered this very visible industry into a million little pieces and forced it deep underground.
The shift was just dramatic. Before 2004, the whole thing lived in this legal gray area. It was concentrated in specific places, and the state even had a hand in managing it. After 2004, it was strictly illegal for everyone, scattered everywhere, and the state's role completely flipped from management to enforcement.
But here's the thing. The demand didn't just evaporate. The industry adapted. It morphed into all these new forms that were way, way harder to track. It moved behind the closed doors of massage parlors, fancy room salons, into private apartments, and of course, onto the internet. You see online ads, social media call-outs. It even includes figures like the Bacchus ladies, older women who offer services to elderly men, often in public parks.
Okay, so here is the crucial point in all of this. Forcing the industry underground didn't make it disappear. It just made it invisible. And that invisibility? It created a whole new world of dangers.
To give you a sense of the sheer scale of what went underground, just think about this. In 2003, right before the law was passed, some estimates suggested that as many as 1 in 25 young Korean women were involved in the industry.
But after 2004, trying to get reliable data like that became pretty much impossible. As this quote points out, the crackdown completely destroyed the ability to do any kind of real statistical survey. The actual size and shape of the industry became a total mystery.
Now, if you just glanced at the numbers, you'd think the law was a huge public health success. This data shows that in those old, dismantled red light districts, the reported rates of things like syphilis and gonorrhea just plummeted between 2008 and 2014. That's a clear win, right?
Well, not so fast. Researchers immediately raised a huge red flag. That drop in reported cases wasn't necessarily a drop in infections. It was a drop in visibility. By pushing workers into the shadows, the law also cut them off from the health services and prevention programs they used to have access to.
And this created a really dangerous news cycle. First, the regulated districts get shut down. Then, the workers scatter into isolated, hidden places where they're basically on their own. That means they lose access to regular health checks, to support systems, to any kind of community. And the result? All these new, completely unmonitored health and safety risks start bubbling up in the dark.
So this brings us to the social fallout. The 2004 law didn't end the debate over the sex trade in South Korea at all. If anything, it just kicked off a new, even more intense chapter.
At the heart of this whole conflict are two totally opposing worldviews. On one side, you have the official state position, which says the trade is, by its very nature, exploitation, and the workers are victims who need to be rescued and rehabilitated. But on the other side, you've got a workers' rights movement saying, hold on, sex work is work, and the real goal should be decriminalization so they can have safety and basic labor rights.
And this tension has been playing out in public ever since.
You've had sex workers themselves protesting in the streets, demanding the right to work. Meanwhile, the government has launched these big campaigns to try and change the culture around buying sex. And just recently, some of those former Camptown workers have actually won lawsuits, forcing the state to admit its own contradictory history with the industry.
So after all this, what's the situation today? Well, it's definitely not a formal regulated industry that pays taxes or has any kind of social safety net. Instead, what you have is this persistent, completely unregulated and untaxed underground economy that just keeps operating outside the system, even though it's undeniably still a part of society.
And that leaves us with the final and I think most critical question. The 2004 law definitely succeeded in making a very visible industry disappear from public view. But did sweeping it into the shadows, where it now thrives without any oversight or protection, did that actually solve the problem? That's a question South Korea is still struggling with to this day.